Hey guys, welcome back to Trial and Error. Today I'm going to make a video that I wish was available to me probably 20 years ago when I bought my first, well maybe 15, 20 years ago, somewhere in there, when I bought my first welder. If you're a fan of my channel, you already know I do things a little bit differently and I'm pretty cheap. So we're going to look at all of the different inexpensive ways for you to weld, and I'll cover what I recommend everybody start off with if this is your first time considering going to buy a welder. And I don't necessarily follow the rule of thumb that most people do when it comes to this type of stuff, so I'm just going to give you my spin on it. I'm not the best welder you'll ever meet. I'm not the most knowledgeable welder you've ever met, but we're going to talk about everything I've learned over the last 15 to 20 years or so of metalworking, from angle grinders to plasma cutters, both forms of MIG, AC TIG, DC TIG. We're going to cover it all here because I have that equipment to kind of show you the differences between them and again, what I've learned over the last 15, 20 years. So stay tuned. I'll teach you everything I know. It's a pretty short list. Hey guys, as I was editing this together, I realized I have way too much content here to stuff all into one video, so I'm going to break this up into two. This first one is going to be focused all on the welding, and we will do a second video that is going to be focused on the cutting tools. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoyed this video all about welding. If you check out my store, I also just dropped a bunch of new merchandise, including this shirt, which I made specially for my wife. Along with quite a few other ones that I'm really proud of. So if you want, check them out. There's links down below me. So before we get into anything, I think it makes sense for you just to give you a broad overview of the equipment that I have now and what I use. So I've got under $4,000 in here, and I can do just about anything with metal and just about anything with aluminum that you can imagine with these four machines. So you don't need to spend the $4 grand, obviously, or you might want to. It's up to you, but just so you know, this 4,000 covers everything you could possibly need to do with metal. Let's start off with our first machine here. This is Prime Weld. It's an extremely highly rated, one of the Chinese cheaper brands, but I'm in love with this thing. It is incredibly powerful. The only thing I don't like about it is the fan noise. It doesn't have ramping fans. They're all single speed, and that's kind of annoying when you're TIG welding because you need peace. TIG welding is a bit of an art form, and the fans are kind of annoying. Short of that, for the price that they charge, what you get for this thing, AC and DC TIG, so we're talking straight into aluminum, you don't have to worry about a spool gun or anything like that. This is an incredible machine, and we'll get into that. Right next to it is my newest addition here, another one of these Chinese knockoff brands. So this one's funny. It's got a hitbox gun on it, but it's called some other name, and I can't, even if I saw the name, I wouldn't be able to pronounce it. But you'll see this, it's the same system that Harbor Freight actually used for a while, with a nice color screen, and excellent for beginners, but I didn't buy it for the beginners. I bought it because that screen allows you to really fine tune. This will go all the way down to 10 amps, so when you need to weld sheet metal on a car or something like that, it gives you extremely fine control of the amperage that you're putting into the metal. So we'll look at this guy, and that is a gas MIG. Right here is my first welder I ever bought. It was a Lincoln, and it's probably 17 years old now. This thing is a flux core welder, and this is where I recommend everybody starts. I know a lot of people say go with the TIG and learn the TIG, which is the hardest of the welders to learn. I completely think about this the opposite way. When you're starting off to learn anything, you've got that ramp. If any of you guys watch Av, he does a really good job explaining that ramp to knowledge as you're learning things. And down on the bottom here, it sucks. So if you're down on the bottom here trying to learn on TIG, a lot of people will get disappointed and just get frustrated with it and say, I can't do it, and leave it. If you can learn with flux core MIG, it is the easiest possible welder out there to learn on, and you can build a lot of confidence quickly. The other thing you'll get is a very good understanding of just general heat and how metal and heat interact. And once you learn that, you kind of understand how to get that puddle and what that puddle does, how to weld two different gauge metals together and kind of control that heat. If you can learn those are just fundamentals that you can build on, so that when you get into a TIG welder and then you start doing aluminum TIG, you have a much better understanding of how to manage that heat already from your experience here. These are the cheapest welders you can buy short of a arc welder, just a stick welder. which honestly I don't recommend for anything. They're kind of useless. If you're out on the farm in the middle of a field and you need to rig up a couple of car batteries to weld something together, that's one thing. But beyond that, stick welding, unless you're in heavy industry, doesn't really have a place in most homeowners or hobbyist shops. Next to that, we have our 50 amp plasma cutter, and the plasma cutter is probably the single most important tool I've ever bought. It changed the way that I worked with metal, short of a welder. This was the other big thing to get. And we'll talk about some of the critical things that you're going to want to look for in an inexpensive welder like this, which you can probably find now for about 350 bucks, 400 bucks. The pilot arc is the #1 feature you want to make sure your machine has. Keeps you from having to scratch start it and allows your consumables to last a lot longer. So that is all sitting on a Harbor Freight cart. I forget what these run, maybe 250 bucks or something. And this cart has been absolutely awesome for me. So on the right-hand side door here, I've got, this is some weld aid. This is a spatter control product. It's great for when you're using MIG, especially when you're using flux core MIG. But it's also a good nozzle cleaner for your regular gas MIG. So I got my welding helmets in there, I've got my Lincoln jacket, and then a few extra power adapters and cords down the bottom. Most important thing in here is your consumable shelf. Big believer on keeping a full stock of consumables because this stuff's so cheap now if you can order it online ahead of time. That way you've always got it here because it never fails. You're in the middle of a project when you burn up your last tungsten doing TIG, or I scorch one of my plasma cutters, which I do just about every time I use it because I don't like to use the guards, but whatever the story is. It's good to have a good stock of consumables, and again, thanks to Amazon and eBay offshore stuff, you can get a drawer like this filled up for maybe 80 bucks. In materials, and it just keeps you going on a project. Having what you need, always available to you. Below that, clamps, magnet, 90-degree things, a couple extra gloves, typical welding stuff. Down here we got some extra lenses for the welding, goggles. I've got an extra 10-pound MIG wire loom here. I always keep that, not loom, coil. Always keep that handy. And then down on the bottom here, I have my TIG torch, arc welding, and then my foot pedal for TIG. Keep down here. On this side, I have 2 tanks. The smaller of the 2 tanks is pure argon. So this goes straight to this machine, and it's what you want when you're TIG welding, is nothing but pure argon. It's the more expensive of the 2 gases. But I ended up going, this is a 80 cubic foot tank, which will last, a hobbyist a very long time. Next to that is a 120 cubic foot tank, and this is a mixture of argon and CO2. So this is 75% argon, 25% CO2, and this is what I use for MIG welding. Typically you go through a lot more MIG welding gas than you do TIG, so I've got a larger tank to compensate for that. I don't like going and getting the tanks filled, so these are bigger than you would find typically you're probably going to need. But if you're like me and you don't want to run around and run out of gas, run out of consumables, you go big on all this stuff so that you can just keep going and plowing through projects. It's there when you need it. On the right hand side, we've got a handle to pull this monster. I've got my plasma stuff kind of coiled up on a hanger here, and then I have a regulator which I run my air line to run the plasma cutter. So this is all mounted, affixed to the unit, makes it very easy. Plug in the air when you need it. Regulator's already preset to the pressure that this thing needs. You don't have to adjust anything, you just give it an air supply and you're off and running. The back of this thing is where the real magic happens. So what I've done is permanently wired in all 4 machines so that all I need to do is plug in this one outlet to 220, 30 amp service, 220 volts, and it runs all 4 machines. And keep in mind, one of these machines, this flux core MIG, is a 110, so that's only picking up basically one of the huts, and then to the ground, it's using the ground as a neutral. It's bonded, so that's fine. So I have one hut feed here, another hut feed here, and then the ground. And everything is plugged in to run on one cord. So switching between machines is, there is no switching. You just turn it on and you're off and running. These are for TIG welding. I've got steel and then aluminum. rods there on a nice holder. This actually comes with the cart, and really, again, loving the cart system, but wiring these things all up together was the best thing I ever did. If I do need to take one, obviously you can see I can just unscrew these two and I can screw it right into a regular outlet. So say I need to go take that 110 meg out to the field or something, that's easy still to do, but it's not an often issue. In fact, that's a never issue. Love this setup. This has been the best, smartest thing I ever did. Which isn't really saying much. I don't do many smart things, but this was one of them. So the latest addition is this table. I wanted a welding table for a long time, but they're extremely expensive. They're generally very heavy, heavier than I need, not for a home shop. So I decided to get one of these guys, which is basically what you see in a commercial kitchen. These things are super cheap, stainless steel, I don't have to worry about it. All I have to do is ground one of the legs, and now the whole table's grounded, so my workpiece, as long as it's sitting on the table, is connected to ground, so that makes life really easy. And like I said, very inexpensive. It's on wheels. I can move it out of the way. I can use it on a project if I need to for things other than welding, but when I need to sit down and do a detailed TIG, I've got it at the perfect working height, so it makes life real easy. So we're going to start off with the Flux Core Lincoln MIG welder. So this is the one that I learned on, and whether it's this or another type of MIG welder, and I'm going to list a few in the description that I know of or have friends that use, along with the newest version of the Lincoln here. But these are an inexpensive, relatively inexpensive way to get into welding, and it's an incredibly easy machine to operate, and it'll just really help you build your confidence in welding to begin with. So the setup for this, very simple. Ground clamp goes here, and we have a wire feed system that will push the wire out through. Obviously the tip of this is energized. When you hit the metal, you're closing the loop on that. Very simple setup. As far as controls go on this particular unit, you have an A through a D setup that controls your amperage, which is directly related to the thickness of your steel. And then you have a speed control to adjust the speed at which that wire comes through. Now that's also dependent on the material that you're burning through. So we're gonna play around here with some 1/8 inch plate, and this is almost at the max as far as what a machine like this can penetrate through and really make a good solid weld. You can get, this will do up to 3/8, and I've also done up to 1/4 inch with this machine, which is pretty heavy duty stuff for a 120 volt welder. But if you preheat that material, the 1/4 inch, I'll preheat it with a torch, get it up to temp, then this can do a much better job of getting good penetration on that. So there are little tips and tricks that you can use to take a small machine like this and actually do some pretty decent structural welding, and that's just happens to be one of them. So I'm just gonna fire this guy up. We'll make a couple of welds here and give you an idea of what you can expect from a MIG welder. I'm gonna crank that up to D. I'm gonna go to about 3.5 on the dial, which you'll get a feel for the more you use these machines. As far as speed, things like that go. So disadvantages to MIG welders are they are the messiest welder out there in terms of spatter. They fling stuff everywhere. So you'll see I did put my thank you. I did put on my little welding jacket here because it will burn through your clothes. I've destroyed, just ask my wife, I've destroyed 1,000 shirts due to slag. My sensitivity is way off. Way sensitivity. The other recommendation for you is an auto darkening helmet. I will link this guy in the description. This is the best cheap helmet I've ever come across. It's got the controls on the outside, which I like way better than the controls on the inside here that are tough to get to. This is just a great, comfortable welding face mask. Haven't obviously done anything to it or brushed it down or anything, but that's what you can kind of expect. Focus! From a MIG weld. So you see a lot of spatter around it. That's just the nature of a flux core welder and MIG in general. But in terms of a weld, when you polish up this turd, you can actually get a pretty decent looking weld out of a flux core MIG. I mean, it's not going to be any of those Instagram welds, but you know. So, you know, I mean, it's a respectable looking bead there in some heavy material, and that is on just a 120 volt welder. That is absolutely the way I would go if you're just starting out. Very, very simple way to learn how these things work. Next step up gets us into a gas MIG. So it's the same type of welding, whereas you have the wire being fed through the nozzle. But with this, you actually have a mixture of argon and CO2 that surrounds that weld in your weld puddle, and that is a much better way of shielding. They call it a shielding gas. That is a much better way of shielding the welding process versus having flux in your wire that we have on the MIG here. That's flux core. That's what tends to, make all of that slag. You'll still get slag with this, but it's considerably less. So your post welding work is a much easier job. It's a lot less cleanup. And then also, because we have less slag, the heat from the welding process is better directed into where it needs to be, into the base metal. So these guys, 100 amp weld on a flux core is not equal to 100 amp weld on a gas MIG welder. This is a fantastic option for a beginner as well, and I'll show you why. Yes, it has a color screen. You can play Tetris on it now. It has a color screen, and what that allows is we have a menu to choose from. So we hit this MIG first option, and it literally tells you how to connect, because you can change from a positive electrode to a negative electrode, but it tells you how to connect your electrodes. So, I mean, talk about like beginner 101. You push the button again. The next screen brings us to what type of material you're welding. So you have your normal iron, stainless steel, up into aluminums and all of that stuff. We're going to just be on ferrous metals, so we'll click the FE. It's going to ask you what type of gas you have. If you're using a mixture, as we've talked about, I'm using the mixture of argon, or if you're just using straight CO2, you can select between the two. We're using a mix, so I hit mix. And then the diameter of your welding wire. So 0.6 millimeters up to 1 millimeter. You may more commonly know it as like a 0.30 or a 0.35 MIG wire. I've got a 0.23 in there, which is pretty close to the 0.6, so we're gonna keep it there. And then your welding type selection. So 2T is just normal, pull the trigger, it's welding, release the trigger, it stops welding. When you go to 4T, it's set up so that if you're doing a long range of welding, you tap that trigger once and it stays welding until you tap it again the second time. So for the most part, unless you're doing some really long weld, you're gonna keep it in the 2T. And then it asks you about your material thickness. So up to 3.4 millimeters is what is in this automatic selection mode. So for material thickness, the easiest thing, just a digital caliper like this will get that job done. So this is a 250 amp welder, but it only gives you an option up to 3.4 millimeters, which is exactly what we have, what we're gonna be playing with today. But this welder has no problem just blasting through 1/4 inch. You will get full penetration there. 250 amps is a lot of current. This thing definitely packs a punch. So we'll select that. And what it does is it basically puts everything in the range of about where it should be. You can fine tune any of these, all that you want, depending upon what you see. But the other thing is, if you're a pro, you don't need to do any of this stuff. You just simply go over to MIG Man, so manual, and from here, you set the basic welding parameters, and then you can control, obviously, everything that you would on a normal manual machine without a big pretty screen on it. All right, I got my super special welding camera set up here, so hopefully you guys will be able to see exactly what's going on here, or as good as I can make it anyway. Now this one's going to have a lot more, it's going to have a different sound to it too. What you're looking for here is basically like popcorn snaps, and that's kind of what a good MIG weld should sound like. Woo! That's pretty. You can see how red that is on the inside. That penetration is a beautiful thing. On the outside, now I didn't clean the metal, so there's definitely some crap in there. But one thing to note is look at the difference in the slag produced by gassed MIG welding. It is considerably less stuff to have to clean off your workpiece, and really, again, focuses that heat all in one spot, right where you want it, in the weld puddle. Oh, the wonderful thing about TIGgers is TIGgers are wonderful things. So we're gonna do some TIG welding here, which is by far the closest thing to an art in the world of welding. I am not an artist with TIG. This is the newest skill set I am trying to get a handle on, and I am at that bottom of that information curve, very much still learning. However, I can speak to the quality of the machine and the value for the money in this. This thing, I am definitely what's holding back these welds, not the machine. This is an incredible bang for the buck. You've got DC TIG welding, which is common and relatively inexpensive, but you also have AC TIG welding for aluminum. So you don't have to use a spool gun. You can go in and truly weld aluminum. That's how you see those beautiful aluminum Instagram welds. It's being done with a machine like this. And for the price, it's a phenomenal multi-process machine for that kind of money, and it is built like a brick shithouse. So I'm very impressed with this. I'm gonna do some TIG welding here just so you can get an idea. It's definitely a higher skill. You're controlling your heat in one hand in terms of positioning it and getting it into both pieces of metal, while your other hand is feeding in fresh material off of a rod, while your foot is controlling the amperage coming out of that torch. So all three of those things kind of have to work together just right to get a nice looking quality weld. And I get it sometimes, I don't get it some other times, but I know with practice it'll just come along. The important thing is I got the right tool for it. So that's half the battle. So we're running pure argon on this one, as we talked about earlier, as your shielding gas. One other point to TIG is it is incredibly sensitive to anything on the metal. You want to have that as clean as you can possibly get it. It does make a huge difference. Otherwise, any type of contaminant, it's going to show through in the weld. MIG, you can kind of hide some of that, but not with, there's no hiding it with TIG. It shows itself. So we're going to fire this guy up, and this one is loud. Sounds like a friggin' jet taking off. I'm not necessarily going to get into all of the details, but a lot of the features that you're looking for, your starting current, your upslope, and then your pulse welding, this has all of those features, none of which I'm any good at using. But that is something that you want to get in a TIG machine, is to make sure it has all of those options, downsloping, end currents, all of that independently adjustable. But for what we're doing now, we are on DC. I'm going to drop our welding. What are we welding, actually? No, I'm not going to drop it. We're going to probably go right around 100 amps. Now remember, that is just my max current setting that I want going through that pedal. And most people would say, well, it's an adjustable pedal, so why wouldn't you just max the thing out at 215 or 225 amps? And the reason for that is you want to get within the range that you're going to be operating, because you've got a set limit of pedal motion. So if I've got 2.5 inches of motion and I am setting it at 200 amps, Well, now I've only got 1 inch of motion to control where I need to be. If I can set it a little bit closer to what I think I'm going to need at my max current, so 100 amps, well, now I've got 2 inches of pedal travel to get to that 100 amps, and it makes a much easier way to control the amperage going into the workpiece. All right, here goes nothing. This thing's gonna be. So again, nothing to write home about, but is that gonna focus? Yeah, too hot to hold. If you notice, there was no slag, no spatter, no nothing, so that's great, especially if you're doing interior work on, say, like a roll cage in a car or something like that. Just keeps you from damaging everything around it. Oh, my TIG torch wants to commit suicide. That, without question, requires a lot more skill. And like I said near the beginning of the video, to me, it is so much easier to kind of master it at its simplest level and get the principles of melting metal together, and then you continue to add in. Now, is it the most cost-effective way? I don't know. If you know for sure you're going to have to get to a TIG, maybe going with the TIG right out of the gate is the way to go, because I've got a lot of machines here, but at the same time, I have a purpose and a use for every single one of these. And I still, despite having these guys, I still go back to the FlexCore MIG for a lot of things that just need to be quick. I don't want to waste gas or have to, burn that up when I don't care about slag on, say, a tractor implement or something like that. There are places for all of these things. So if nothing else, if this spurs you on to want to dig a little deeper into metalworking, it is, from a hobbyist perspective, it is one of the most fun things I get to do and that I can play with. The possibilities are endless. Your creativity can go crazy, as if you think of it, you can build it out of steel at that point, and that's really fun. I've made all kinds of tools with these tools. It's one of the few tools in the world that you can use to actually make you tools to make other things easy. So those two things are huge. You don't have to spend a fortune to get into it and buy reliable and well-working tools. Again, with the exception of the Lincoln here, everything else is knockoff stuff, and it works great. It really does. It's come a long way. The stuff coming out of China and the stuff especially coming out of South Korea, this stuff's great. So as always, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, and/or criticisms, make sure you throw them down in the comment section below me. Otherwise, everybody, thank you for watching. Make sure you like and make sure you subscribe. If you're not subscribed, it really helps to get my channel some attention, and that I very much appreciate. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.